The Education Lounge podcast.
When you were taking GCSEs, what did you think? Like an A level?
It's funny you say that. I think I actually looked at the actual paper that we did and compared it to. I was just doing a quick comparison between that year and 2017, which was the first year that they brought the examinations in, and I do definitely feel like the new GCSEs, at least in terms of maths, there are a few more challenging questions towards the end of the paper. Whereas I think previously there'd only be maybe a couple of challenging questions. In my opinion, I still feel like those who work hard and work consistently throughout their time in secondary school will still be the ones who go on to achieve the top grade. So I think overall you'll still probably find the same sort of percentage getting the top.
I think that's true, because I think if you're exposed to a high level education, then the top students will adapt to level. So I remember doing GCSEs when I was younger, and certainly with maths it was very easy. I found it quite simple, but then now I look at it and I kind of think, actually, the first year of A level was actually easier than what they do now in GCSE, I think, in terms of application, like the types of questions that you get and the problem solving. But even though you've got sort of, obviously, like A level, you do a few extra topics and that kind of thing. But I think in terms of the depth, in terms of the type of question that you get, it's a bit easier. Or it's a bit harder now than it was back then. Even at GCSE level, and then A level, I don't teach much of it because I generally concentrate on history. But what about maths?
Maths A level,
yeah,
it's one of the more challenging A levels for sure. It's up there with I would say physics has been one of the more challenging A levels. But again, same as what I said for GCSE. If you work consistently and you've got some sort of routine or pattern for studying, and you're studying throughout your time at A level, during the A level course, and not just
at the end.
Yeah, not just cramming at the end. Then again, you are likely to be one of those who achieves.
I was definitely a last minute Larry when it came to like exams. I remember just like even sometimes it was the night before. I just crammed the whole thing in one go, and throughout the whole year I'd be getting like awful marks.
No, I was too, but then I realised I've just got to change my way. I can't be so lazy throughout the course of
now. I don't think I could do that with the current say the current levels. I do think to get a top grade, to get like a 9 or something like that. I think I would have had to work relatively hard throughout the whole time, rather than just.
What do you think of the GCSE grading system?
The 1 to 9.
Yeah.
It matched, UCAS.
Yeah.
Like I noticed, because I was like, why are they doing this? And because I was like, it seems like a semantic change that means nothing in the grand scheme of things, because you're just changing letters for numbers.
Yeah.
And surely like numbers are harder to understand than the letters. So I was like, what's the motivation behind that? I think it's, UCAS points. I think they match up to the. So 9, you getting, if you're getting top grade of a 9, that matches to 9 UCAS points. So maybe it makes sense in that way. And I know A levels, it's completely different. It's like 100, and you get so many points for one A level. When you're applying to uni,
the different grades.
And so that's why I think they didn't do that change for A level?
And I mean, it's strange, right? Because you've got this number system for GCSEs,
Yeah.
right? Which each number translates to some sort of letter grade.
Yeah.
8s and 9s being your top A star. But then when it comes to A level, right, it goes back to letters.
Yeah, no, it is weird. But then that's why I think it's because of that, because the UCAS, because I was like, what could this be? So I kind of just explored it, and I was like, oh, so a 9 in GCSEs actually matches 9 UCAS points that you achieve.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just think it's a little odd. I think it should be
consistent.
Yeah, it should be the same throughout your GCSEs and A levels.
Yeah, you find students sometimes and parents especially get well confused by the number thing.
Which is what, I was just going to say that.
Yeah, because they're like, what does that mean? Like 7 or 8? Is that good?
Yeah,
yeah, that's really good.
I get that. I get that all the time. I get parents coming, and I'll have both students and parents come in at GCSE, instead of telling me the number that they were assigned. They'll tell me the letter, so they'll be like, "All right, okay, I've got an A star," and then I'm like, "Right, okay, is that an 8? Is that a 9? Is what is that?" So yeah, it's a bit of a strange system at the moment, I think.
You know how you can have students who, not our students, but you can have students that achieve, like, say a 3, a 2, or 1 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the sort of failing grades. Do you think that psychologically it's probably less painful receiving a 3 compared to like a D? Like, that might be one reason why they've gone down that route too.
I don't particularly see that. I think if you failed, you failed, right? If it's eventually, I mean, if this system is held in place, eventually, that 1 will be synonymous with our previous, what was it, a U, an E?
Can't
remember.
Well, like, even if you didn't turn up to the exams, you get a 1. So they still haven't got. They took the U out completely. In terms of, because you obviously went, and me too. We both went down a semi-academic route, I suppose, because we did A levels and then we did university, and we both did a master's degree.
Yes. Yeah.
So, like, obviously not everyone's like that. So they won't necessarily go down an academic route. Do you think that GCSEs has the same value for everyone and A levels? Right.
That's a good question. I would say it's maybe controversial, but it in my opinion, yes. Like, so if I can, I'll relate it back to math, for example. So, very often in class, I'll get asked, why are we learning about fractions, ratios, percentages? Like, when are we ever going to need them? Well, if you go on to become a baker, right, your ratios and proportions
matter.
Yeah, your ratios and proportions matter. If you go on to be a pharmacist, you've got to be able to calculate infusion rates. I think there's, and I'm not a scientist by any means, but I think there are mathematical equations that link, I think, the transport of water and I think other things from the kidneys. There are actual mathematical equations for that, I believe. So one of the things we learn about in GCSE, also A-level maths, is parabolas, right? And they're actually used as reflectors of light and radio waves. Right? So I don't know if you've seen, but telescopes and spotlights, they use parabolic mirrors, and it's the same with microwave antennas and radio telescopes, right? So that they are, if you look at a microwave antenna, it's parabolic in shape, right? So, I mean, even things like car engines, right? I'm trying to think of the top of my head here. A car engine needs air and fuel to burn, right? So those ratios, again, matter.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I imagine it's the same with, I'll let you talk about English, but I mean, definitely English.
Yes, no.
I have no idea why I said I imagine English is useful.
It's interesting though. It's like, obviously English is important, like your ability to communicate, send correspondence, be accurate in your writing, that kind of thing. But I actually think that English is a challenging subject to study, but I don't think it's necessarily the most valuable to learn how to write in the most useful way. And that's one of my sort of criticisms of the GCSE English language paper.
What do you mean by that?
So, I think one of the reasons why I was able to cope quite well with university and other things is simply because of studying history. I think history and philosophy too, because I did philosophy A level and I did a philosophy degree. I think those taught me how to write well more than English. Now, English is quite it's useful if you go on to study literature and that kind of thing, and you go down that route, and it's good for understanding the emotive side to writing. But I think in terms of presenting findings or doing research well and that kind of thing, I think history is absolutely brilliant because you've got to think critically about sources, and I think that's a really important skill, thinking critically and analysing. And then you've also got to synthesize all of those thoughts into an argument that flows. And I think there's nothing more valuable than history, like in terms of something that you can learn. And it's actually one of those subjects where you can talk about it with other people. Like you can talk about a historical event and you don't sound like a weirdo. Whereas if you went to a party and started to talk about parabolas, I'd be like, okay, okay, so, so I do think there's certain subjects I think that are sort of extremely valuable, and then maybe, although having said that, I don't want to judge a subject as not being valuable, because I do think there's something you can learn from anything. There's a few, we call them softer subjects, yeah. So one of them's media, but maybe media is the sort of thing that the student's interested in, and it's a bit easier to get a higher grade. That's what they typically say, but it could be valuable for a certain student. Was it one of our friends? He did textiles for A level, and he thought it was going to be a bit of a DOS subject, and it became this intense project work based subject, and he ended up dropping it because he was like, it was so much work compared to everything else. But it was a very good route to go down if you want to do fashion.
No, I think even subjects I don't know whether they offer at GCSE, but I think they do at sort of college level. But other art subjects like photography, which I think are very useful.
Yeah,
I think I was reading recently about someone who studied photography, and he loves his career now, and I think that's important, isn't it? I think the question is for me is what you learn at this level, at secondary level, is it applicable to the real world? And that's why I come back to, I think a lot of subjects are. I mean, you mentioned media. I think obviously now, with social media being as it is, a subject like media will be, I'd say, it'd have a high demand.
Yeah.
So no, I think that GCSEs are valuable, but I think we still need sort of changes in our education system, because you go through 4 or 5 years without having any sort of official exams. You go through year 7, year 8, year 9, year 10, and then bang, at the end of year 11 you've got this one exam. So
that's something that I've said on sort of previous videos, that I believe in some sort of continuous assessment. Throughout the years, because I know quite a few people who are just like last minute Larrys like me. Essentially, they leave it last minute, but throughout the whole year they're just chilling, and they end up with like a top grade. And then you've got people who like working consistently, doing quite well, and then I've seen this happen. Just some people struggle to perform in exam conditions. And first of all, more assessment throughout the years
would help in that regard.
Yeah, because they'd get more practice.
Yeah.
That was a big thing. When I was younger, I didn't really practice that much for exams. I did pretty well, but like I felt I probably should have taken more papers, like in the past, and past papers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Before actually taking the final exams, because I went in a little bit cold, and then I felt like my performance was slightly inconsistent sometimes. If I'd done more past papers, that's definitely an advantage that they've got now. It's so easy to, like, the internet is a lot more organised than it was when we were younger.
Back when we were younger, yeah.
Yeah. So like now I don't think there's an excuse for not practicing enough for the exam, like not having enough test practice. But yes, like doing some official exams in previous years would probably help people in the long run, because they get more used to it. Like my wife, she comes from Vietnam. They're obviously very used to exams. They take so many all the time. They have like a test every week, even at primary school level.
No, but I think that can be good as long as there's
learning.
Yeah.
Oh, and she obviously learned a lot. Like she's like in Vietnam, they seem very in a lot of Asian countries, they seem a lot further ahead in things like maths.
Oh, I'd agree with that. Yeah, I think that's definitely true.
They've got a few alternatives, and I know you've spoken with children or students who've completed their GCSEs, and they've decided not to go through the A-level route.
Yes.
And you from your experience, you know how difficult maths can be at A-level, and then sometimes students get, say, like a 6 or sometimes a 7. Just kind of depends. And so they're clearly decent at maths, like a bit above average, but they need. But you still think that to do an A-level in maths would sometimes be an unwise decision.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, from what I've seen, if you've got students who have got 6 and even 7s at GCSEs, and I'm talking about maths in particular here, if they go on to do maths at A level, they tend to struggle. They tend to find that jump quite difficult.
Yeah.
And I think you've got to know the individual too. So, like, were there extenuating circumstances that led to that grade at GCSE level? If there were, then I may recommend that look,
have a go.
Yeah. Have a go. But if there weren't,
if they worked quite hard and they came out with a 6 or 7, then
And it's not the, it's not the end of the world if you don't go and do A levels. Many people go down the route of doing a BTEC, or
there's like this
look
T level thing as well.
Working on or you find others that look for working opportunities as soon as they finished. I think there's various sort of school leaver programs out there that companies offer, things like plumbing courses and things, which actually
may suit the child better.
But I think more importantly, can also lead to quite a successful career.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think nothing. If you work hard, right, you will have a successful career at some point. You will see the fruits of that labor. It may not always be straight away, but at some point you will definitely see it. And I think there's this train of thought that you have to do A levels, you have to go to university to be successful. But I don't think that's true. I've seen with friends of mine that that's just simply not the case. And you're also still a member of society that's
valuable.
Yeah.
As long as you can sort of, I think if you can become the top, say 10% in your field, like no matter what that field is, that's good, and you'll probably do quite well.
Yeah.
So go for the things that you generally got aptitude for and are really interested in doing, and can go at it like 100%. For me, it was like quite, because I almost went down the academic route by default. I just didn't really know what I liked, so I was like, okay, I'll go to university. I'll study something relatively open-ended. So I did philosophy and ancient history and classical literature, and that was quite wide. So I studied all kinds of things, like so that's why I think history was really valuable for teaching me about how to write better, and philosophy is really good for sort of honing your argumentation skills. And then I did my master's in economics and politics. I had to argue my way onto that because I hadn't done it at A level. I hadn't done like economics before. I hadn't done politics at all. So yeah, like I studied something quite open ended, and I went just for things that I was interested in. But if I look at like my wife, she went for accounting because she was like, this will make me money. Also, it kind of depends where the student's from, because she's from Vietnam. If you don't, I think like poverty is a real danger, like for Vietnamese people, or like for certain countries. Right?
Yeah.
Probably like a lot of Indians. They want to study something that's going to produce at the end of the day, going to get that return on investment. Whereas in the West, I feel like we've got a bit more leeway. We can kind of study what you're interested in, and you'll probably find your way to success.
Yeah, that's a valid point. Good. I mean, going back to what you said about your masters, so you've obviously done quite a difficult master's course. What sort of experiences and advice can you give to current students now? GCSE students, A level students. What advice can you pass on to them?
One of my sort of I think one important piece of advice that I'd always give someone is, if you don't understand something at first, it doesn't mean that you're stupid. It actually means that you're accessing it at the wrong level. So always look for a different way of accessing the topic. if one way doesn't work. So it's like what we do when we teach. If a student doesn't understand a topic, try a different way of looking at the topic. So you've got to try different things in order to make it make sense. Like we've done that quite a lot of time with, like, say something like place value. When children start learning place value, it can be quite a challenge because they don't really understand the number system and it's very abstract. And then when they actually, if you come at it from loads of different angles, then they start to understand it. But they might not understand it straight away, or they might not be ready to understand it because they're missing something else, like in there. Like children need to learn from the concrete first, especially Key Stage 1. But even at Key Stage 2, some of those kids, those like Year 4s and Year 5s, they still struggle with the concept of number, for instance. They don't fully get it. So you need to keep sort of tackling that as an issue. And what I found was learning something completely different, you can feel like you're drowning in it. So drowning in the subject. It's a bit like learning a language and then like deciding to read, like, I don't know, a difficult work of literature in that language. Don't do it. It'll just put you off because it will just be too above your level. So it's important to find a resource that teaches you in a simple way. So one of the first things I did when I was doing economics for the first time was I just read a comic on economics. Like, and it just had the history of economics, but in comic form. And it sounds ridiculous.
No, I imagine something like that is quite
fun.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to read something like that now that you've mentioned it.
Yeah, I'll recommend it. Link in description. There's So like I'd always say, tackle a problem from multiple angles, or tackle a topic from multiple angles. You've seen it with, like, say, a maths student. When you teach a topic initially, you take it from the very beginning. It's like teach them the foundations that they need. Then you increase the difficulty, and then you'll add something else, and you'll be like, okay, well, all right, this is. Oh, so like for instance, quadratics. You when you're teaching quadratic formulas or quadratic equations, you would never start with like, this is the formula, or something like that, would you? Like you'd start saying, okay, well, let's look at the shape of a quadratic graph.
Or ask yourself where does that formula come from? Why is it useful? These sort of questions are quite important. So I do try and encourage my students to dig a little deeper and strive for excellence.
Yeah, mastery of the topic.
Because
deep understanding.
If you push yourself to try and understand that topic in depth, right, then it virtually doesn't matter whatever question you're given, whatever sort of difficult problem-solving question you're given. If you've understood that topic in detail, right, you'll be able to tackle it. And so I think what I see quite often is, because GCSE exams can sometimes be a little, or at least they were, GCSE and A-level exams, sometimes a little formulaic in their question styles. So you'll see people trying to question spot, and I'm like, look, hold on a minute. Let's try and understand this topic fully, and then you don't even need to worry about different question styles, right? Because you'll be able to tackle.
Yeah, some people want to think like a robot. Yeah, as in, but they're not a robot. Exactly. So a robot will be able to do it much better than them.
Exactly. Yeah.
And thus they'll never reach the level that they need to unless they were to, actually think like a human. So try and actually do some problem solving around the topic and think critically about it. That's something that I'm noticing quite a lot, because I've been teaching A-level history, and like one of the most important things is, for the first time, the girl that I'm teaching, she needs to learn how to think critically, actually think critically about sources, stuff like that. Don't and actually getting her, trying to teach her the skill of thinking critically is the challenge, because I think up to that point it's like they're in a sort of reception mode. They're just receiving all of this information, and then churning it out. Right? So, but now it's like at A level especially, they've got to start thinking a bit more critically about things, especially in history. I know there's like source work and stuff like that, but at A level it's really key. Like it's so much more important. And then I'm also trying to encourage. Well, she wants to go down a sort of more academic route, so I'm also saying, okay, well, you can take this information, and if she wants to be a lawyer, right? And I was like, this is really, really important for skill as a lawyer, is to think critically about a source or a piece of information. Like, how can you think of this piece of information in more than one way? So it's again showing the relevance of education taken the right way. So if you take your GCSEs and your A levels the right way, and you take that information into your degree, it can be useful, and that'll be a useful skill throughout your life.
I mean, let's say that you've tried your best. You know, you've done all you can, and you haven't achieved particularly great results, right? At GCSE and A level. What do you do from there? Should you be worried at that stage?
Like, you've tried really hard and failed.
Yeah.
Essentially. There's this kind of link between success and like eventual success and sort of failing early. Is what. So don't be too disheartened by the fact that that you failed at something. The important thing is to remember that, like, first of all, failure is expected in life at some point.
I think at some point you need to fail, right? You need to get things wrong in order to learn. I mean, again, relating back to maths, people think that a lot of these formulas that we have in maths, Pythagoras' theorem and things, people think that these were just created on the spot, without the mathematician making mistakes. I mean, that couldn't be far off the truth. It's they've had to make mistakes to come up with these formulas that we use now. So what I would say is, if you've made a mistake, don't be afraid, don't be worried. If you've not got the results you've wanted, right, I'd say take some time, sit down and identify, okay, why did that happen, right? And then put measures in place to prevent that from happening, right? So if it was simply a case of, you didn't work hard, or you put in a lot of hard work, but towards the last month, right, then obviously that's a correction that should be relatively easy to spot. Maybe not easy to correct, but definitely easy to spot, right? And then you say to yourself, okay, well, next time around, this is what I'm going to do. And again, you might find yourself, when you're making these corrections, you might find yourself still slipping up. But I think the important thing is to not be too hard on yourself. If you've tried to make changes, just say to yourself, okay, I've made too much of a change too quickly. Let me dial this back a little bit, right? But the key for me, when I've seen students who maybe haven't done as well, right, I do say to them, look, ask yourself why, right, and try and make some adjustments now, right? So that
I know people who've
it's
messed up their GCSEs a bit, but then they've gone on to do really well at A level. Because I think they develop and learn from it. But then I've also known some people who've never really failed at anything, and then they get into their mid-20s, or they go to Cambridge or something like that, Oxford or Cambridge, and then they just crumble because they've never had. I think they're so used to being perfectionists, and they reach that point of where
can't do
you're
this
working
now.
at such a high level that their failure is inevitable at some point.
Yeah.
Like at that kind of level, they've been on easy street essentially their whole lives. Maybe not in terms of like working hard and stuff like that. They've worked hard, but they've never had that sort of shock of failure, and then it really hits them hard, and they have like all kinds of sort of mental health issues as a result. So failures, just treat failure as inevitable, I suppose, would be good advice. But learning from failure is equally as important.
Yeah, learning from those failures.
Will allow you to turn it into success eventually.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like one of the that's why something like when I start with a student, one of the first things I do is give them a test, because then I can see where they failed, and then I know what they need to address. Now, whether that gets addressed is kind of, it's a combination of things. It's down to me as a tutor. It's down to the student as well, like putting in the effort to and understanding that those areas are important to address, and then it's down to the parents to ensure, I don't know, they're sort of keeping up with it. But if we're able to tackle those like pain points, I always think like if something's painful to do, it's worth doing. Like I've had quite a few kids who they struggle with writing, or like they don't want to write, but that's the most important thing for them to do, is they struggle with it.
Yeah.
And if they keep doing it, then
work on your weaknesses. Yeah.
You've seen that a few times with like GCSE math students. I've seen like they struggle with fractions or something like that, and you're like, this should have been fixed a long time ago. Like it should have been something that was tackled a long time ago, but it wasn't, probably because it was a point of pain to work on it. And it's like when I remember at GCSEs, I think that was like algebra. I always struggled. I did struggle initially with algebra when I was in Key Stage 3, so like year 9. But I spent like extra time just on my own, just practicing algebra, just to get better at it. And once I got good at it, I was just like flying, as in my maths improved like across the board. As I was in set 3, I eventually ended up in set 1, like for A level, or the first year of A level. And I think it came from tackling that pain point, because I knew that I was confused by, as soon as like letters were introduced, I was like, it's weird. And then I started tackling it, and it wasn't really a pain point anymore. So
no, I definitely agree with that. You work on the things that or prioritize the thing, your weak areas, right? Without forgetting your strengths. But yeah, I mean, just going back to it, so I just want to say to those who've received GCSE results recently and A-level results, if they haven't gone the way that you've wanted, right, don't worry, it's not the end of the world, right? But you must try and identify what went wrong and what measures you can put in place to prevent those sort of failures or disappointments in the future. But it's definitely not the end of the road. So don't panic.
Yeah, definitely don't panic. Yeah, panic's usually the worst reaction you can have.
All right. Okay. So we've just spoken about those who finished GCSEs and A-levels. Let's talk about those who are just about to start. So I know it's a little weird because some schools start the GCSE syllabus when they're in year 9, and then I think others sort of take a stronger focus when they're in year 10. So let's say those who are starting year 10, because that's probably the easiest to start with. What advice? Maybe we'll do this. Maybe we'll do some advice for those who are starting year 10, some advice for those who are starting year 11, and maybe in particular those who've sort of done well in year 10 and going into year 11, but also those who maybe have slacked off a little bit in year 10 and going into year 11, so we can maybe give some advice for those people, and we'll do something similar for the year 12s and year 13s. Shall we start with the year 10s?
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to students starting year 10 now?
I'd say consolidate your key stage 3 a little bit. So make sure that you've got strong foundations on which to build, because although it seems like a bit of an aimless time because you don't have an exam at the end of years 7, 8, and 9, I've noticed that the students that have a very solid knowledge of their key stage 3 in science, maths, whatever, we will do better at GCSE because they'll be able to step up to the level a lot quicker. And there's a lot of topics that obviously cross between key stage 3 and GCSE. So there will be some additional stuff that you'll learn, but so much of it is it's just sort of adding on an extra layer of difficulty.
So basically what you're saying is make sure that your foundations are strong.
Yeah.
Right. And you're going to achieve that by maybe going back through some old textbooks that you have, Key Stage 3 textbooks, go through some questions from there. Make sure you've read, if you've got a good set of notes, read your notes first and then maybe go through some questions.
Yeah.
That's a good start, I think, for those that are in year 10. And what about across the year then? What would you?
First of all, I'd say work consistently.
Yeah.
And use your holidays as well, like those half terms. And
I was about to mention the holidays,
because it can be tempting to switch. I know that I did, but I know like if I had worked a lot during that sort of, even a little bit every day, it goes a long way to sort of achieving that final result, and it will put less pressure on you for that sort of final sort of period between.
It definitely does.
Study leave.
It takes a huge. So I always say that look, year 10 is one of the most important years in your academic life, right? Because if you study consistently and you study hard throughout that year, it takes a huge amount of pressure off for year 11. You're not in a mad rush for year 11. So definitely listen to your teachers in school is what I'd say. Make sure you're completing their homework on time. Make sure you're using your weekends too, right? I mean, you're not in school on the weekends, right? So the weekends shouldn't just be for fun and play.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's fine to dedicate some time for that, but you've got so many hours on the weekend that should be spent, consolidating and also learning new material.
Yeah.
Because what I say is what I've said about the year 10. So make sure you're working consistently throughout the year. Make sure you're doing the homework that your teachers are giving to you in school, and make sure that's been done on time. But also go a little further. And then in that summer period where you've got 6 weeks off, right? That is such a valuable period where you can be working and getting ahead. So try and get ahead of where you are in class.
Yeah, I've noticed a massive drop off sometimes at the start of the year from the end of the previous year and that summer holiday period. Like you notice that they're rusty, and then that's when they go into year 11 from year 10 to 11.
Yeah,
I find that actually the first few months are quite important because you're going to be. I mean, you're not going to have that much time at the end if you don't have really strong foundations at the end of year 10. It's going to be quite hard. So make sure you use the summertime wisely.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be crazy. You'll probably have some holiday homework and that kind of thing. So make sure you do it all. But also kind of go a bit further if you can, because the ones who go further tend to do quite well. And then I'd also say what I've noticed sometimes is usually a student who's in a poor position doesn't know their exam very well. They sometimes don't even know like the board of the exam, and they don't know
That's
the topics.
important. Make sure you know your exam boards at the very least.
Self-awareness,
Yeah.
like knowing what actually comes up in the paper. It makes you more efficient in your working and keeps you organised. So I'd say know your exam. That's
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say, so for those who are going into year 11, should we start with the ones who maybe sort of underperformed in year 10 or haven't worked as hard, right? Again, I go back to if you're in that position now, what would you say to those who've underperformed in year 10 and just about to start year 11?
I'd say,
what advice would you offer
first
them?
of all, I think you need to identify those pain points that we talked about. So I'd start just by taking a test, just to see, or like going through some test questions and just seeing where it is that you need to focus. Where are you missing sort of key sort of information? It might be hard for you to identify sometimes because like we've got many years of experience teaching, so we can usually work out why a student's struggling with a certain question, and then locate the topic. But what I'd say is ask your teacher. If you struggle on a question and you're not too sure why, go to someone who has a bit more experience, and just to point you in the right direction. And say like, okay, well, you're not understanding that because you don't understand this. So it's good to find someone who knows a little bit more about it, whether that be someone who's really good at the subjects at school, or whether it's a teacher or a tutor, or maybe even a parent in some cases if you're lucky. And then I'd also say like tackle those pain points early on in the year. So in that September period, especially at the beginning, because a lot of the schools will they might not ramp it up straight away. They sometimes have quite a slow lead into the year. So use that time at the beginning of the year as wisely as possible, and try to do some extra work on the weekend. Think about it this way: just work really, really hard in year 11, because you're only going to have, you want it to be a first time thing. You don't really want to be in the position of having to do retakes and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, because everyone who, in my experience, has done retakes, they find it really a drag. And also I find that the material isn't, like they're not going to have that much time to learn the material as well, because retakes tend to be at the beginning of year 12 when they're at college. And what I found is that sometimes the classes, they're not really focused on what the student needs to do. So you won't necessarily get that help in school that you'll get in year 11. That's been the case with some of our year. Like we've taken some like retake students, and they don't. What I find is that the focus isn't really on them. It's on their sort of the teacher's current cohort in year 11, and not on the year 12 student.
I mean, I think I'd echo some of the things that you've said. So if you're in that position where you maybe haven't done as well as you wanted to in year 10, you know, in your end of year exams, you maybe haven't performed as well as you should have or could have. You know, make sure you've identified weak areas and start looking at those weak areas now. You know, try and speak to your school teachers. You know, ask them if they can spend maybe a couple of minutes outside the lesson, so you know, during a lunchtime, or maybe a couple of minutes before or after school, to just sit down and explain maybe something that you don't understand. What you'll find is that most teachers will actually be quite happy to do that. They'll sort of be quite happy that you're that you're quite keen and eager to make some changes. And then if you're someone who's sort of on the other end, so you've done well in year 10, you've achieved a good set of sort of end of year exam results, continue that, right? What's working for you, continue it, repeat it, and see if there's any ways that you can improve on it, right? So are there ways that you can be more efficient?
So with A levels, something that I noticed with my A levels is is definitely more of an issue now than it was for us, because we had 1 year of A levels and then the next year we had full end of year exams for
official exam board.
Yeah, but now because they've got exams at the end of the second year
only, yeah,
that sometimes, especially I think with maths, it's a bit less of an issue because it all builds on itself so well. So there'll be a lot better mathematicians by the end of year 2. But in something like history or English, you need to go back and revise your year 1 stuff and know that really well and keep refreshing it. Otherwise, the sheer amount of material will really get you at the end of year 2.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in general, a similar sort of thing for subjects like maths, physics, chemistry. Make sure, so if you're one of those who's going into year 12, same thing as what we said for those going into year 10 and year 11, make sure you've consolidated your foundation. So I can speak on maths. That'll be things like your indices, your surds. Make sure that you've got those, make sure that you know your laws of indices inside out. And again, just make sure that you're consistently working throughout the year. Go through your textbooks, work through those questions, go through questions that your teacher's given you. And then if you're entering year 13 now, right, vital year, it's important, I would say for year 13 in particular, that you start reading ahead. So what I would do is I'd speak to your teachers in advance. I'd find out what they're planning on teaching for that week, and you try and read up on that topic before you go into lessons, because I think that gives you quite a good platform when you're in lessons. You'll find that you're probably a little less confused, right? Because what I find sometimes is people go to their lessons, they'll try and take in what their teacher said, and then it's sort of a backward approach where they go home and they try and learn that topic independently, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I'm saying is, what'll help is if you know what your teacher's going to be teaching you beforehand, right? So you can read up a little bit on that topic and then go into your lesson prepared, or at least semi-prepared. So that's the advice that I'd give year 13.
Something that I advise some of my A-level kids to do is to read ahead a little bit. So exactly what you said. So read the text early. Because sometimes they go through them in class and it's so slow. And they'll have a much better understanding of the text generally if they read it ahead of time, and preferably more than once. And yeah, with like history or something like that, there's so much packed in, and sometimes the course textbook can be quite dense. So I'd always say, like, do some pre-reading from like a sort of general guide or something a bit more accessible to begin with, like before you start the second year. So it basically, like, you've got something your knowledge can sort of latch onto. So they're not sort of learning it blindly and hearing names for the first time and stuff like that. I find that I think that's quite helpful. And practice writing essays whenever you can, and that kind of thing, if that's what your subject demands.
Okay, for those who have finished GCSEs and A-levels, well done for getting through those years of work. And in particular to our students, well done to all of you guys. I hope you're all happy with your results. I know I've spoken to some of you already, and I think you're beaming. Most of you are beaming and over the moon. That's good. Continue that hard work, and thanks for joining us today.